Good evening, everyone. I'm David Selberg, CEO at Hospice of Santa Barbara. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us this evening. There's several hundred folks participating throughout the world, and we are so grateful for your presence here. I would also like to thank the Natalie Orfila Foundation and Lou Buglioli. Also, I would like to thank the Ridley Tree Cancer Center and Mindful Magazine. All these organizations are sponsoring our entire Illuminate Speakers series. Now I have the pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Charles Caldwell.
Hi there, David. Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here. Hi there, everyone. Hospice of Santa Barbara created the Illuminate speaker series as a result of what we've all been going through during the pandemic, all the anxiety and stress that we've all been feeling. And it's been our good fortune to be able to bring in people like Katy who can address some of those issues that we're all feeling. And we're offering this free to everyone here in the community, in the country, and even from people around the world. So thank you very much. And David, back to you.
Thank you, Charles. And now I have the honor to introduce our speaker this evening. Katy Butler is an award-winning journalist, public speaker, and best-selling author. Katy is a thought leader in the national movement for medical reform. She has written 2 groundbreaking books about the end of life. Her first book, Knocking on Heaven's Door, The Path to a Better Way of Death, is a national bestseller. Katy has given keynote and grand rounds at Harvard Medical School, Kaiser Permanente, and UCSF, to name a few. So without further ado, we present to you Katy Butler. Thank you, Katy.
Thank you so much, David. And I want to thank Hospice of Santa Barbara, because Hospice of Santa Barbara doesn't just provide services. It doesn't just provide speaker series like this one. It really is a way of building community and helping us help each other and connect with each other. And especially in these times, I more and more realize how important community is. So thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share with you some homegrown rituals that have worked well in my own life, explore and tell you some stories of other people's rituals, including one that I included in my book. And then at the end of my little part of the talk, I want to encourage you, all of you who did bring a candle with you to your Zoom window, to participate with me in a candle lighting ritual. I hope you're going to find this helpful and empowering, and I hope it will help you build resilience, because as we know, these are very disruptive times that we're living in. A lot of things that we assumed were so are turning out not to be so. And what's most disturbing is that the communal rituals that we usually rely on to get through difficult times, a lot of them are either difficult or impossible to perform because of concerns about contagion and social distance and things like that. So I want to start with an image that I just love. Cheryl, could you share the image? Wonderful. This is Lois Levering. She's 99. She's dying. She's on hospice. She's in an inpatient hospice unit. And she is greeting her great-great-granddaughter, Shelby, for the very first time. And if you look, you can see in the picture, surrounding the bed are other family members. People are getting to say their goodbyes. I just love this picture because of the image of new life coming into the world and greeting the old life, which is about to leave this earth. Such a powerful, beautiful image. And it's part of a tradition that goes back generations and centuries and probably millennia. The idea that we can gather around the beds of people who are dying and be there for them in some way. And as we know, this has been so deeply disrupted. During the Civil War, this deathbed ritual was so important to people, this vigil, that soldiers dying on the battlefield would actually bring out daguerreotypes, precursors of photographs, and arrange them, family member pictures around them, so that they could have some sense of creating the family death vigil. And as we know now, if you are very sick and go to the hospital, the likelihood is that there will be no visitation or very, very limited visitation. And so something so profound and so common has been interrupted. Just want to let that just sink in for just a second. And also share that this is actually not unique to the pandemic. I want to share you my personal story. My mother died about 10 years ago on the East Coast. She was a very strong woman, and I was in some denial, and I did not listen to my intuition, and I failed to come home in time to say goodbye to her. She also died on hospice, a wonderful death, as wonderful as a death could be. But I was not there, and it grieved me immensely. And a friend of mine who's Jewish said, go to the supermarket, go to the kosher food section, and get something called a yahrzeit candle. It's a yearly memorial candle that is lit on the anniversary of a death in the Jewish religion. It's been going on since at least the 1600s, if not before. So I did what she said. And Cheryl, could you show the next picture, please? I created a little home altar to my mother. And I put up photographs of her that you can see. That book is a book that she actually helped illustrate. I lit the candle and I created a really beautiful little memorial to her. The wonderful thing about the yahrzeit candle is that it burns for exactly 24 hours. So this is a time-bounded ritual. It has a beginning and it has an end. So it helps us create a healthy kind of compartmentalization around grief that we want to acknowledge, we want to connect with, we want to really go very deep with, but we also need the reassurance of knowing that there's a beginning and an end. Could you show the next slide, please? So here I am. So you can see my little hallway. It doesn't have to be fancy. Any little card table will do. You can create, just with a few flowers and candles, a very, very sacred moment for yourself. And I found this beautiful and comforting. It was comforting because there were some elements of my father's death, particularly, that were somewhat horrifying to me, even though, again, he did die on a hospice unit. It was as good as it could have been. But there were some elements of that long death vigil that were horrifying for me. And he'd had a 7-year decline because he'd had multiple strokes. And so bringing these photographs of when they're healthy, those flowers, it was a way of kind of balancing the loss with the love and the empowerment with the feelings of helplessness and the beauty with the experiences of trauma. And so I want to encourage you to think of ways that you might use ritual that could really help you with the struggles that you're having in your life now. I do believe this yahrzeit ritual could be adapted very beautifully for a family death vigil when you cannot be present. Let's say you've been shut out of the hospital, but someone you love is declining and dying. You could create a little altar like this at home and keep acknowledging them, being with them in spirit, even if you can't be there in the flesh, and light a new candle every day and really allow yourself to connect with the sacredness and the enormity of what is taking place. Next slide, please. And this tradition that I tapped into is actually almost universal. I wouldn't be surprised around the world. A lot of you who are tuning in who might be Mexican or Spanish speaking or Spanish descendant. This is an ofrenda. I believe this is a Day of the Dead ritual. And you see not only the photograph and the flowers, but also cooking the favorite foods of the ancestors. Again, bringing in beauty and life and the senses into experiences of loss. Thank you. That's the end of the slides for right now. What are the elements of ritual? Well, to start with, we enter sacred time. It's wonderful if you can create a little corner of your house. It could be just an armchair. It could be a corner. It could be an entire room where you can create some beauty and order. And if there isn't a space in space, you can create a space in time by getting up, for example, before anybody else in the household, and then having some moments of silence there. We acknowledge the depth of the change that is taking place. So during a funeral, we're acknowledging that someone we love is gone. We're speaking aloud this enormous and disruptive change, which is going to change the roles of everybody involved. We bring in beauty, we bring in the senses. It could be incense, it could be music, it could be chanting. But we enliven the senses, and that brings us into the present moment. This is one of the things that's most difficult, I think, about all the Zoom rituals that we've got. You know, Zoom is very heady. It's very hard to connect with your heart and your gut, which is so important in ritual. So that's partly why I showed photographs. It's partly why I've lit candles and put a flower behind me, so that we can have as much sense as possible of being in our senses. And finally, after we have acknowledged and shared, we try to connect with something bigger than ourselves. It could be the human community. It could be a religious tradition that we're part of. There's something that's so comforting to me about that yahrzeit candle, because I know that many, many other people have lost people that they've loved, and they've used this candle for hundreds of years. And so it gives me faith that, like them, like our ancestors, I am going to be able to survive this and go on, and that my loss is normalized. So our losses get normalized. Our preoccupation with ourselves hopefully gets a little air, and we became capable of also giving to the lives of others. There's something wonderful about knowing that what we've gone through, our ancestors have gone through as well. So that's, in a nutshell, what I hope to share with you about ritual, and encourage you to mix and match these elements in your own life so that you can make rituals that truly, truly speak to you. Now, I'd like to involve you directly in what we're doing. I want us to do a little mini ritual here, which is to name the losses that we have been suffering. I think there is a Q&A function, and you can go into the Q&A and make comments about things that you are missing right now. I've learned a term that I found very interesting. It's disenfranchised grief. People are suffering direct grief now, and I assume there's many people on this call who may be suffering this. Maybe you can't go see a relative who is in nursing home or assisted living. Maybe someone you love has died. 3 friends of mine have died in this period, and I haven't been able to go to a funeral for them. Then there's also vicarious trauma. We see images on television of healthcare workers suffering, or if you personally are a healthcare worker, you may be suffering a great deal of distress because of seeing families not be able to participate in the process of death, and then just the sheer numbers of deaths themselves. And then finally, there's this disenfranchised grief, which is for those of us who have small griefs and small losses. We feel we don't deserve to mourn them because we know other people are suffering so much more. So for example, I have lost something. My little coffee clutch, there are a group of women, we used to get together every Saturday morning at Starbucks and just joke around and talk and have a great time. And the loss of these small connections, I mean, we really are herd animals. We're like sheep. We like to make giant pig piles and be with people and just even be in the presence of people we don't talk to in a coffee shop. And that, all of that, we are not seeing now. So several people have contributed. I'm going to see if I can get in to the Q&A function and see what people have written and read a few of them out. Missing touch, isolated from my 92-year-old mother. I miss hugging my grandchildren and my dear friends. Just simply being with our church community. My family in New York and in England, hugs. Can't be with my brother whose wife is dying. Work. Not seeing my children or grandchildren. Not being able to be with friends or travel. And living with the fear of illness for myself and my loved ones. Freedom, eating out, museums, visits, shopping. Freedom from anxiety about the future. I can really relate to that. There's been just so much disruption of things we assumed, including assuming the strength of our democracy. It's been very, very difficult. My best friend is dying in hospice. I cannot see her. I ache. Dancing, live music. My sweet aunt who died pre-COVID. My parents. I have had to separate myself from my daughter, my sister-in-law, and 2 young grandsons in order to live with and care for my 83-year-old mother who has worsening dementia. So as you can see, human touch. Somebody recently that I talked to said, smiles. You know, we miss not being able to see the smile on the face of someone. I hope you will find ritual ways of acknowledging the depth of these losses. It's so important for us to be able to name what is going on. And there's something magic about ritual that allows us to also transform into new roles. We get to accept the very difficult realities and get out of denial. You know, denial and numbing are not helpful to us, and nor is being flooded and overwhelmed. So these time-limited ways of really, really tapping in can be helpful. When my dad died, we had, of course, a memorial. This is pre-COVID, so we had a memorial service. We gathered in the chapel. And my mom was in a receiving line at the end of the service. And a magic happened in that service, which is that my mother was acknowledged that she was changing her social role. She was no longer a caregiver and a wife, and she had become a widow. And once she had this sort of new social identity, she could then reconnect with other widows, other single women, and she started up quite a number of new friendships. And some of them actually had their root simply in that receiving line at the end of the service. So there are ways that ritual allows us to take on new roles, to accept a new reality, and to feel somewhat refreshed and connected with other people, to know that we're not alone and to move forward. So that's where I hope the resilience part comes in. We need to ennoble our suffering as well as experience it. Now, I would like to share with you a beautiful ritual that is a pre-COVID ritual. It was created by 3 nurses in Santa Barbara. They are oncology nurses, and they worked at Cottage Hospital. And they wanted to bring more sacredness to hospital deaths. This was pre-COVID, but I think there's a way that we can do it in our imaginations and that we can find it very helpful. I'm going to read a little from my book where I wrote about their service. And I want to encourage you to touch your own body as I go through this ritual, because again, we're suffering from skin hunger. Those people who live alone are getting very, very little touch. And even touching our own bodies can be helpful to bring us into the present moment and make us feel connected with each other and just with ourselves. Because I want you to remember, care of the soul is an essential service. The language of the pandemic has not really created much space for emotional and spiritual needs. So these phrases like shelter in place, it's kind of like, actually get out in nature as much as you can. Just don't get too close to other people. Shelter in place is really difficult. Social distancing makes it sound like we should be kind of shut off from each other. So I have a friend, and if she sees us on the street, she will go, "Hello, distant friends," and we will make this kind of fake hug from the other side of the street. So invent these ways to keep connecting with people. Now I'm going to share with you their beautiful end-of-life ritual. I used to share this when I gave live readings at bookstores and communities. And I noticed when I looked out in the audience, I would see a number of people closing their eyes because this ritual involves touching and anointing the various parts of the body. And after the reading, people would come up and they would say that they'd closed their eyes because they were imagining doing it with someone they loved whose death had not gone in the way that they had hoped. There had been perhaps too little ritual, too little of a sense of sacredness or silence or connecting. So I want to encourage you to follow along with me. And if you choose, imagine doing it with the body of somebody that you love. In 2011, Deborah Rogers, Debbie Roth, and Beth Combs, all of them nurses in the oncology unit at Cottage Health in Santa Barbara, created this bathing and honoring practice to help families and the nurses themselves say goodbye. After washing and dressing the dead in clothes from home or a clean gown, the nurses encourage relatives and friends to anoint the body with lavender oil. The physicality seems to be very helpful, said Beth Combs. I have a theory that after witnessing a death, we go into shock and our minds become numb and chaotic. When we start bathing and touching our loved ones, our bodies understand what our minds cannot. Here is an adapted version of their service for your use. As the hair is anointed with oil, a nurse or family member recites, "We honor Jane's hair that the wind has played with." Next, a dab of oil is gently rubbed on the brow as someone says, "We honor Jane's brow, the birthplace of her thought," in the appropriate place. We honor your eyes that have looked on us with love and viewed the beauty of the earth. We honor your nostrils, the gateway of breath. We honor your ears that listened for our voices. We honor your lips that have spoken truth. We honor your shoulders that have borne burdens and strength. We honor your heart that has loved us. We honor your arms that embraced us. We honor your hands that have held our hands and done so many things in this life. We honor your legs, which carried you into new places of challenge. We honor your feet that walked your own path through life. We give thanks for the gifts that you have given us in our lifetime. We give thanks for the memories that we created together. We have been honored to be part of your life. I just love this. And I love that these nurses, they just created something. They created something beautiful that's not part of any particular religious tradition. Out of their own need for more sacredness, they created something that could be such a service to others. And then they shared it in an oncology nurses journal, and they joined a Facebook group that I started called Slow Medicine. And they shared this ceremony with me through their writing. And now I get to share it with you, and it gets to go wherever it goes. And we all feel somewhat connected. And hopefully you will take it as an inspiration to create your own rituals that really speak to you in your language, with your sense of beauty and presentness. So great. Now I'm going to go back and just show you a couple more photographs, really to inspire you. We're in a time of mass trauma, and usually in times of mass trauma, some kinds of memorial observances get created, or, rituals, monuments, national cathedral services, days of mourning, because we want to remember, and we also don't want to always be flooded. So go ahead, Cheryl, would you start the photos again? And go to the next photo. So this is Burning Man. An artist named David Best would create a temple of mourning every year. And people could go and write the names of the people who had died that they wanted to honor and put them inside this structure, and then it would be burnt on the last day. And then the next one, please. Roadside altars. In the inner city, you will see this kind of altar when somebody has been murdered on a sidewalk. We want to bring beauty, and we want to remember what has happened and share it with our human community. Next slide, please. The AIDS quilt. We had a terrible epidemic, mostly confined to one community. It was a stigmatized disease, and the people who got it were stigmatized. The AIDS quilt was a beautiful ritual of bringing all this homemade beauty into each of these squares, and then displaying them on the National Mall so that it became part of our shared psyche and not just limited to one human community. We were all connected. Next slide, please. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Essentially, it's an altar. It's a sacred space where someone can go and see the name of a buddy or a family member who's gone, and like this little flower, bring beauty and remembrance to it. And one more slide. This woman is the hero of the pandemic as far as I'm concerned. Her name is Tanisha Brunson Malone. She is a morgue attendant in Hackensack, New Jersey. And when bodies started to be stacked in refrigerator trucks, she went and spent about $100 a week of her own money to buy yellow daffodils. And she goes into the refrigerator trucks and she puts a flower atop every single body bag. She creates a moment of sacredness so that we realize we are more than our material body and our very difficult material circumstances. So if she can do it, we can too. Thank you so much. I think we can drop that slide now. I hope this is inspiring for you. I hope it encourages you to do something that speaks to you. It could be part of a particular tradition. It could be connected with a traditional sense of the divine, or it could just be connected with nature and beauty. Just remember to create sacred time. Unplug all the devices. Some people do this once a week. They can have an electronic Shabbat. Turn off the phones. If you still have a landline like me, unplug it. You can do this in the morning. You can take a very, very small morning ritual. I get up, I resist the temptation. I use it for Insight Timer, but I do not go on to media. It's so tempting to want to know the news of the fresh disasters, but we don't actually have to hear about the fresh disasters first thing in the morning. And the way you spend that first half an hour or hour of the morning is probably going to determine how the rest of the day goes. So I use Insight Timer, I resist the temptation. I read a couple of spiritual readings that are inspiring to me. It could be just a poem. It doesn't have to be something spiritual, you know. I read 3 different translations of the Tao Te Ching, which is a very well-known Taoist text. And then I meditate for half an hour, but it's very, very informal. I just make myself a cup of tea. I'm quiet for half an hour. And that gives me a way of grounding. And so I can face the day. When my mother was a caregiver for my dad, which was a 6.5 to 7 year period, very, very difficult for her, very, very draining. She would insist on getting up, I think about an hour and a half before he did, and she would actually just insist that he stay in bed. So those of you who are caregivers, maybe this is a tip, but she would do yoga, she would meditate, she would do a body scan, because she knew she had a very, very difficult day ahead of her. And if she was grounded, she was able to face that day and be a more humane person for the course of the day. So remember to create sacred time in your life. It doesn't have to be long, but it needs to be a little period where you're not interrupted. Bring in beauty, bring in the senses, Bring yourself into the present moment. Bring a candle, bring a flower. Acknowledge the reality that is going on and how our lives have fundamentally changed and that we need to take on new roles. Ask for help from the universe, however that's meaningful for you. And then finally, close up the ritual and know that you can come back to it, because rituals are best when they are repeated on a regular basis. So thank you very, very much for participating. I so appreciate what we've been able to do so far. We're going to do a candle lighting ritual now. And you can enter in the Q&A, you can enter the names of people that you are, people you've lost, people you worry about, and people that you would like to honor. So during the ceremony, you can enter these names and we will hold the candles up. All of us who are on the panel are going to hold our candles up to the window. And we would like you to hold your candle up to the window also. Even though we can't actually see you, I think we're going to feel it. And we're going to feel it all around the world, the people who are participating today. So get your candle. And we are going to light our candles. And we're going to read 3 times a little ritual. I'm going to just read it once so that you can have a sense of it. It's also going to be in the Q&A and or in the chat, I believe. So you will be able to see it. And we're going to recite it 3 times. I'll be the only person actually speaking because it's a cacophony on Zoom if you try to actually say things aloud. In lighting these candles, we honor those who have died, those who have cared for them, those who are mourning. We honor our own losses, large and small, and we give thanks for another day of life. Now we're going to repeat this 3 times. So please light your candles and hold them up to your Zoom window. In lighting these candles, we honor those who have died, those who have cared for them, and those who are mourning. We honor our own losses, large and small. We give thanks for another day of life. In lighting these candles, we honor those who have died, those who have cared for them, and those who are mourning. We honor our own losses, large and small. We give thanks for another day of life. In lighting these candles, we honor those who have died, those who have cared for them, and those who are mourning. We honor our own losses, large and small. We give thanks for another day of life. Thank you so much. Thank you to my panelists, Deborah, David, Mark, Jesse, all of you for holding up your candles. Much appreciated. Now you can put your candles down. You don't have to blow them out unless you want to. And we're going to move to the next stage of our talk, which is to share some questions with the panel. And before I do that, I'm going to go back into the Q&A and just read a few of the names that have been introduced here. Let's see, got to go down here. Sorry for my, here we go. David Shelton, David Gertle, Dallas, Evelyn, Willie, Nellie, Audrey, Johnny Sandy, Harvey, Matilda, Neville, Harry, Blanton, Mont, Pat, Debbie, thank you all. Sharon, my husband, Mom and Dad, thank you all. Wonderful. Mary Esther, Richard Rothbard, John Burgess, Sylvia, Carl, Tracy, Charlie, Anthony Quinn, Nurses in the Trenches, Phil, Cindy, grandson Marilyn. Thank you so much. And I'd like to bring in my names, Matt Heron, who died, and Rich Simon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katy, for your talk and for the candlelight ceremony. We're deeply grateful to you this evening. I now have the pleasure or the honor to introduce a discussion group this evening of some folks from our community in Santa Barbara. These individuals have been with those in end of life and those in the dying process. And they include Jesse Bresendine, Mark Collier, and Dr. Deborah Myers. So I would like to turn it over to Jesse. Thank you, Jesse, who will moderate this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Katy, for such a moving presentation. You know, as I was listening to you share and considering rituals in my own life, something that really came up for me was, and in reading through the Q&A, is that there's this longing for connection. There's this grief that we're feeling so heavily of not just those who have passed, but also those who we can't touch and connect with. And that rituals, while we do them throughout our days in ways we don't consider, brushing our teeth, how we get dressed,
Yes.
it becomes this opportunity for us to really be present and intentional about connecting with others, about having a ritual where just in doing the candles and holding it with all of you, I suddenly felt like I was part of something more than just myself.
Yeah.
And I wasn't just in this room in front of this screen, but I was a part of all these souls from all around the world doing something sacred in this moment. And I really love that, like the invitation for a ritual to be about a way to connect when we feel so disconnected right now.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're so right. We do feel disconnected, and there's a lot of stuff kind of coming at us on Zoom, but the chance to connect in the other direction is more rare, right? And I loved what you said about brushing your teeth, the small daily rituals that can be very sustaining, and we can connect them to something larger than ourselves. I lived for 9 months in Thich Nhat Hanh's Buddhist community in southern France many years ago now. And he had a whole practice called gathas, where it's a little tiny recitation. So when you turn on the tap, you say, I turn on the tap, acknowledging and being grateful for the water that comes from the mountain. And in washing my hands, I wash my hands in connection with all beings. You could even make a ritual out of, you know, how we were talking a lot about hand washing at the start of the pandemic. You know, I wash my hands out of my love and caring for all human beings so that I can be protective of them and not pass on this virus. We could even consider that when we put on our horrible masks, which I really don't like, but I know it's very, very necessary. And so to almost everything we do, there is an interest in connecting with and being kind to others in what we do. A lot of us, I think our deepest intention is to be helpful to others. And if we make it a little conscious in our minds, I think it can be very sustaining. I'm so glad you brought that up. The little things, the little moments.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting, this, you mentioned, you know, being at the bedside and watching people die, which is an awful lot of what I've done in the last 10 or 12 years. But this last year has been something that is so out of the ordinary, because in my deepest desire and my most amazing experiences, the bedside experience is one of that family that you showed in your first slide. It is always with someone else present with the one who is dying, and to have that be removed has been the most painful thing that I think I've ever experienced. And I don't know, as a provider, how to give solace to my patients' families in that situation. So I love what you have offered, because it is actually in such you know, in this Zoom world of our individual lives, it is a way to connect as an individual and a way to bring a ritual to folks that I know are suffering. So thank you so much. It's just
Yeah,
so
I think it's so
timely.
different. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, that when someone's dying, really the family is the patient. It's not just the patient.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the ritual called the pause? Have you heard about the pause? Sometimes it's called the medical pause. And I think it might be helpful to medical providers now. It was invented by a palliative care nurse, but it's just when there is a hospital death, for everybody to just stop what they're doing, gather around the bed in a circle, say the name of the person who has died, simply acknowledge and say, this was a human being, this was a life, and this life has ended. And we honor that life, and we honor the valiant efforts of the medical team. And then they just stop and they're silent for 30 seconds. It doesn't have to be long. But I'm very sensitive to all of the trauma that's being suffered by medical people. And I think maybe some of these small rituals might, like the pause, could be helpful to them just for even a moment of refreshment, a moment of being able to connect to the deep meaning of a life ending. I hate to, I have a whole medical reform side of myself, and I think we've adopted some substitute rituals such as compulsory CPR that are actually there. It's a ritual way of trying to show how much we care about the life that is ending. But in the case of COVID, the success rate is just about zero. People do not come back if they die in ICU from COVID. They simply, people do perform CPR, but nobody comes back. And so it's almost like a substitute of a meaningful ritual of caring and connection. Yeah.
Goodness. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is something that occurred to me too, where it seems like often with death and dying, the suite of emotions that comes up for folks is often so then, what's the term I'm looking for? There's the grief and the despair and the sadness, but then there's also the guilt for the things that are unsaid or the actions that were untaken. And there's that unknown piece I feel like people struggle with. But then also now with COVID, it's added in this whole new layer of not being able to be present at a time when I think already many of us are maybe uneasy or uncertain about how to even be present in somebody's passing and somebody's transition time. And it seems like then there's this opportunity to further develop rituals just around that, around a not only a passing of them and honoring them, but also perhaps providing peace for ourselves, a forgiveness ritual, maybe even of us not being able to be there at a time because of the restrictions. We just can't be there.
That's a beautiful idea, Jesse. I hope you think about a ritual that could be created around self-forgiveness and acknowledgement. And maybe it's when you create one of those little altars that I'm talking about, you put the name of the person on a little card, but you could also put another card with your own name saying, I am grieving that I cannot be present. I mean, just to even name it, I think is helpful. There's actually a collective, I think it's called, I don't know what it's called. It's something about Grief Ritual Collective. And one of the things they suggested was put lipstick on and kiss a piece of paper and fold it up and get it given to the person who is dying and put into a corner of their robe so that you have that tactile sense of having connected. I think that's a wonderful thing. You know, those traditional, in the hospice movement, very much people talk about thank you, I love you, please forgive me, I forgive you, and goodbye. I mean, I think, again, some of these we're going to have to do them in letters or put, write a letter and put it on the altar. We're not going to get to be there physically. But I think it's also important to remember that relationships are long, and in some ways it's a stimulus that every day we can be saying to the people we love, thank you, and I love you. and I forgive you, and please forgive me, because at least for me on a daily basis, I need to say, please forgive me. There's always something during the day that I wish had gone differently. It's an impetus. We can say everything except that final goodbye. And the more we can keep things clean, the less of a charge there is to clean it all up in the last month of life or the last week of life, So yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I know often, my father, by the time my father actually was dying, he was unconscious. So during that deathbed ritual, I couldn't speak to him, but I visited about a month earlier, and I was able to make out of the final goodbye that we'd had when I was just leaving for the airport, that was my final goodbye. And we really have immense narrative and meaning making capacities as human beings, and we will take the little crumbs and threads and we will string them together and make a tapestry of meaning out of them. I have deep faith in human beings' capacity for that.
My relationship with ritual has changed dramatically through the years. I was raised in a family where we prayed out loud before every meal. And in my rebellious youth, I rejected it as meaningless ritual. And later in life, as a hospice volunteer, and I see the powerful meaning that ritual has for people. Yeah. And my religious views changed from what I was raised with, but I realize now that ritual of expressing gratitude is profoundly important as part of your daily outlook of just being grateful, regardless of what God you pray to, just being grateful. And the repetition, and as a hospice volunteer, having respect for the rituals of whatever this particular family brings, and seeing the power of that ritual, whether I feel a connection to it or not, is it deserves to be honored.
Yeah. Thank you.
Beautifully said. Katy, one of the things that comes to mind for me with the idea of ritual, and just as we've been speaking, you mentioned kind of your Buddhist roots, and I, like you, Mark, I grew up in a Protestant family, but church was part of every single week, and kind of drift away from that. And many of my patients too have had that experience and don't identify. And it really is one of the most challenging things, I think, for people to come back to some kind of ritual or make it up as you're created. I want to say created, as you're suggesting. When you've come from something that perhaps you've turned away from, or maybe you didn't come from any of that. If you're young enough, maybe you were raised in a family that didn't have any of that as a backdrop, and it is still something that every day I have a patient say, well, I was raised Catholic, but I'm not practicing. But it's still, they still pray. They still have some kind of a world formation that is based on that early life. And I think it's a real struggle for people. So again, I think this being such a powerful moment and impetus, this is a perfect way to come at this again and find other ways besides death, other places we can make a ritual that has meaning.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I'm reminded of my friend Sunita Puri, who's going to be a later speaker on this Illuminate series. And when she was a younger, I think she was probably a palliative care doctor in training at that point at UCSF. And someone died who'd come in from a nursing home and was very, very unknown. And he'd come from quite a distance, actually, like hours away. And she gathered her team around the bed and read a Mary Oliver poem. And we do have these, poems are beautiful, and they don't have a specific religious bent to them, but they can be so soulful. they connect with our souls. And I think that's another way to go. And again, to think of ritual in a very expansive way. I have a story in my book about a guy dying in ICU. It was, not the death that he had in mind. He had all the advance papers, but things had gone wrong. And his friends gathered around and pretty much insisted that he get moved from one ICU room to another that had natural light and an opening onto a courtyard. And they very quickly created like a, what do you call it? A playlist on like an iPad or iPhone, and sort of bunched everything together and made it happen. And so that when he was extubated, they all had hands on his body and his favorite music was playing. So they got to have a feeling that the death was not just completely dominated by the protocols of the hospital, but that they had had a chance to bring in his own real personality, which didn't make it easy. It didn't make dying a easy experience for them, but it left them with a very different sense of connection and empowerment. Yeah.
Kate, you had mentioned just the rituals being repeated. I don't know if all of you have ways that you habituate some of the rituals in your life. I know for me, I use the cell phone and just have a reminder pop up with that. But what are some easy ways that everybody does that maybe people listening, watching could integrate into habituate their rituals?
That's a very good question. I'm a little stumped. I don't know how I do it. I've done it for maybe it's just I've done this morning ritual for such a long time. But yes, I love the fact that the cell phone, you can plug in a reminder and say time to meditate or time to get up or time to stop meditating. Do you have other suggestions? Mark, do you have other suggestions, or Deborah or Jesse? Yeah.
I've tried to tie things that are common to things, that I want to change. And so one of the things that can be so common is that we get frustrated in the car. So one of the things that I do, I drive every day a fair amount. And so my morning, I don't have anything playing other than I do my gratitude. So driving becomes something where it's calming. It's about first the gratitudes, and then just kind of thinking about the day and how I want to go through that day. And then one of the things at home, more than work, but I did notice our palliative care office at the hospital had one of the little Buddhist bells, and I actually have a bell on my table at home. Excuse me, one of the singing bowls. So I'll when I need a break, I'll hit the bell. And it's amazing how just that reverberation makes me takes me to the cushion, takes me to a place that is more at peace and at rest. So things like that can, and I've seen people use their phone with a little random bell that rings like that, so that in the midst of their day, when they don't expect it, they take a deep breath and have a settling second with just that reminder. So a couple things.
Yes, when I was living in Thich Nhat Hanh's community, we would, if any kind of bell rang, you would just stop, like that freeze tag almost, and you would stop and take 3 full breaths and then go on with the day. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, well, you could also use the red light at a traffic light as the same kind of cue to just calm yourself down. And he actually taught people meditation on the subway in New York City. He took like a whole gang of people from a workshop and they all meditated on the subway because, we have difficult, complicated modern lives, and we don't have to go to a monastery or dress up in a robe in order to connect in a deep way, I think. And I just want to throw in something, it's a little irrelevant, but I forgot it during the talk. So, which is that a lot of people are going to toxic rituals during this time. There's skyrocketing addiction, substance use, domestic violence, that people are trying to calm themselves. And a lot of that is taking the form of numbing. And I think connecting with some kind of community is so important. Alcoholics Anonymous has Zoom meetings all over the world. You can plug in, you don't have to just do online shopping, which is another, I got to confess, that's been my problem, online shopping as a numbing. So the more we can go to community, the less afraid we are, or the more we can manage and tolerate our own fear. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Just to know that other people have gone through this and we're not going through it alone is just important in any way we can do it. I mean, Biden did a memorial ritual a couple of nights ago where they lit 400 lights by the reflecting pool to acknowledge 400,000 people have died. And people were encouraged to do that at home. And I just put a little TV tray out in front of my house with a candle and a little tiny sign saying, acknowledging the 400,000. So I felt a little strange doing it. Maybe, I don't know what my neighbors thought, but at least I did something physical with it. So, yeah.
I just noticed the time, and
Yeah.
we're running close on time. Katy, thank you so much for sharing this time. And I heard it's a rumor that's your birthday today. So happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I'll pass it back over to David.
Thank you so much, Katy, for being with us on your birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
All of us tonight just thoroughly enjoyed being with you, your presence and your words. And really a thank you to you, Jesse, Dr. Myers, and Mark for all you do for so many in our community and for being with us tonight in the middle of your busy lives. And I'd also like to say to everybody that we're pleased at Hospice of Santa Barbara to be able to offer this Illuminate series free, but we couldn't do it without the support and help of so many of you. So please consider tonight making a donation to help us ensure that this series continues. Also, I want to share that please visit our website at Hospice of Santa Barbara. Look up and sign in to our future Illuminate events. They're all freely offered and they're open to anybody, but you do need to register before the events. So I look forward to all of you returning, and thank you all for being with us tonight from all over the world. And thank you to Katy Butler. Good night.